I've decided to upgrade you on this one. If you decide you're really hooked on this and we have another convert, then you can actually buy supplies. We have two suppliers here in town and they sell things called Ethafoam cookie pillows. Now this is a gigantic one. You won't need one this big. A 20-inch one is just fine. The Ethafoam is a Dow product. It's a hard, not self-healing, but it lasts an awful long time, the foam. Now I just have some foam core or some cardboard on the back to stiffen it. I've made a cover to go over it. It helps preserve the foam, makes it last longer. So that when you put your pricking on, you can push your pins all the way through and actually dress your pillow properly according to the tradition of the lace maker. The lace maker will take a napkin or a cloth. This is called a cover cloth. This is an old handkerchief that I happen to have. Fold the corner in, so you've got a fold instead of a raw or a hemmed edge, and you're only going to reveal about so much at a time. As you work, you pull this cover cloth down to reveal more of the pattern. The reason for this is it keeps you from snagging the edges of your pricking or the pins themselves, and it gives more of a glide to your bobbins on the pillow. If you decide you want to pin that cover cloth, you go under the fold, again, to keep from snagging pins. This is important when you're working with fine thread because you break a thread very easily. All right. You're going to hang on your bobbins just the way we have been doing. Again, it's 5 large dots at the top all the way across. This is an English lace that I've been showing you. It is called torchon, and it's kind of the wash and wear everyday type of lace that people would have put on the bottoms of their petticoats or household items. It isn't fine lace you'd have on a ball gown. So it was generally made with a little heavier thread and intended to hold up for longer periods. It's a very geometric lace. The English tradition, and if you decide to go buying bobbins, you can buy a beginner bobbin. They usually run, I think, $1, $1.25 a piece. They're usually a blonde wood. This one happens to be a plastic one. And they may or may not come spangled, which are what we call the beads on the end. You can spangle your own, keep your spangles small. The reason for the weight on the end is to help tension your thread and also so your bobbin doesn't roll all over the pillow, which is part of the problem you were having, I'm sure, when you were using those pencils. They want to roll. There are other bobbins as well, other traditions. These are continental bobbins. This one's called a long square. It has 4 flat sides, so it doesn't roll as easily. This is a continental square, and it's pear-shaped, and it has flat sides, again, so it doesn't roll. These are never spangled. You never see holes in them and beads dangling off the end. That's strictly an English tradition. This is the same thread we've been using, but I've wound it on some of my bobbins. These are a nylon bobbin. I like them because they're all the same color, because one must have pretty bobbins as well. Rainbow style, a pair at a time. The white thread becomes a little difficult to see on this white napkin, so it might even be a good idea if you had a colored napkin or piece of cloth. Contrast is a good thing for your eyes so you can see what you're doing. Traditionally, lace was made out of white thread, but there's nothing wrong with light pink or even green. Okay. Now this is what's known as a ground stitch. This is the square netting type stitch that you see in the background of lace. It's done on 4 corners of a grid. And you can see the grid in your pattern. Notice that as well as horizontal lines, you have the diagonal lines. This is important because that's how we actually work lace. We don't work across. We've done that in the first 2 lessons, weaving a thread back and forth. This time you're going to be working on the diagonal. So we're going to start over here on this, where the left-hand corner one is. We're going to put a whole stitch on this just as itself. So it's 2 half stitches. If you remember from the last lesson, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2 over 3, 2 and 4, that's a half stitch. Do that again, 2 over 3, 2 and 4. We're going to pick up the pair from the next spot and do 2 over 3, 2 and 4, 2 over 3, and pin by lifting that left-hand pair. You're going to pin in this second hole of the first diagonal. You had the starting pin, the pinhole we're going to use, and the next one, which is an outside stitch. We're going to use this second one in from the corner. That's a half stitch with a pin. Now we're going to do another half stitch. That makes a whole stitch. Half stitch plus half stitch is a whole stitch. And that closes the pin, which is a torsion, almost exclusively torsion move. Your pin is enclosed by a stitch. It's very sturdy that way. It's a nice square stitch. It's not going anywhere. We're going to finish this diagonal. It had 3 stitches. So we're going to go back to the outside. Use this outside pair and the one we just used. 2 over 3, 2 and 4. Lift the left-hand pair and pin. And repeat. 2 over 3, 2 and 4. Scoot all of these last 2 over. We need to scoot that one out of the way too and go to these next 2. So this is the 2 pairs from this third beginning pin from the left. 2 over 3, 2 and 4. I knew that because I was watching up above. Finish, close the pin. I'll show you out here in the open spaces. If we were going to do this stitch right here, we have to pull in a pair from each of the holes on either side of it in the row above. Can you see that? These 2 pull in to make this pair. That means I'm going to go back now and work this diagonal. Half stitch, pin, half stitch. Adjust lengths as you need to. Pull this one in, half stitch, pin, half stitch. Pull the outside one in, half stitch, pin, half stitch. Notice we're starting to actually see those diagonal rows develop. These 2, half stitch, pin, half stitch, and follow that diagonal all the way out to the left. Completing and covering the pin each time. Begin with a half stitch and end with a half stitch. Half stitch, pin, half stitch. If you get confused on this particular one, study your diagonals. Make sure that you're actually working a diagonal all the way out to the edge, and every time you go to work an edge, it's because you have an edge pair hanging out there. If you don't have one, you pulled it in the wrong place. Tensioning, you just kind of teeter-totter the pairs. The rule is next highest pin. So I know I have to go all the way up to the start every time here in order to work a row, because you can't work a pin hole, in this case, where you haven't worked the one above it. So it has to be these 2 go together to make this stitch, cover the pin, half stitch, pin, half stitch, half stitch, pin, half stitch. There we go. Notice I'm adjusting my length on my bobbins as I go. These are called neat pillow habits. You're supposed to always adjust as you go. Work this pattern as long as you like. You should have enough to get to the end on this one. It's a little shorter pattern. When you decide to end off, go ahead and work your short diagonal rows until you can come straight across, and that'll make it easier for you to end off just the way we did with the other two. To end off, we're going to take 4 threads at a time and make sure you've got, oh, what is that, probably 6-7 inches of thread. Cut the thread off. We're going to do an overhand knot, and that just means make a loop and bring the threads through. It makes a little bit of a tassel. And you're going to do that, and you can pull each thread slightly. We're going to do that all the way across. You may or may not want to go all the way to the end of this with that big thread sagging that way, but go as far as you like. Scoot them out of your way as you go. Remember how to loosen the thread. Pull the loop that's diagonally across. Pull it off completely if you need to. And then you can gently, holding down on the lace so that you don't pull it out of shape. End of lesson 3.